This is Baseline, a podcast about baseball by people who know nothing about baseball. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Andrew, and we know nothing about baseball.
All right, Andrew. I actually, the truth is, you know nothing about baseball. I guess we kind of let on a little bit. I do know a little bit about baseball, but you...
Well, now I feel all isolated.
I mean, you probably also do know a little bit about baseball, right?
This is true.
Okay. Which I think, and this is going to be the titular line here. We have to set a baseline for your knowledge about baseball. So that's the whole point of why we're here. And I figure, why not just do exactly as we said we would do in the trailer and go line by line on both Merriam-Webster.com and on Wikipedia.org as to what baseball is, according to at least since 1828. Let's start with the definition. A game played with a bat and ball between two teams of 9 players, each on a large field, having 4 bases that mark the course a runner must take to score. Okay. It's a lot to kind of go through, but I'm going to break it down.
It's both a useful definition and a very not useful definition.
It is a run-on sentence, if I ever saw one. You do want to run on first pitch sometimes, but you don't want to run on sentence always. Let's say bat and ball, relatively known terms, I guess. If you've ever seen clip art for baseball, you know what that is, right?
Or indeed been alive in America at some point.
True, very true. 2 teams, so there are only 2 teams playing at once. 9 players. Now that's pretty vague.
I guess I've never thought about how many players were actually on a given team, just because the exact number never really seemed to matter that much to me.
Did it ever feel like it changed over the course of a game? Like, does the number make sense?
It makes sense. I guess I'm just saying, like, I never tallied them up and said, oh, that's 9. It's just like, yeah, there's a pitcher and a catcher and a first baseman and a second baseman and shortstop, third baseman and outfielders. Okay.
All right. So you got some of the names too, which is
right.
Already starting off on a pretty good foot, I think. But those are they become part of the cultural lexicon, I think, that we have here in the U.S., where there are things that have nothing to do with baseball, but are definitely about getting to first base or getting to second base, which that's not what this podcast is going to be about. But we still draw these.
Yes, sorry if you were expecting that. That's not the subject matter of this podcast.
There are analogies that people draw between the sports. Obviously, sports analogies are huge. Okay, 4 bases is the next part of that. Well, back up. Large field.
Mm-hmm.
It's also incredibly vague.
Right. How large is large?
Right. When you think about, let's say, a tennis court size or a basketball size court,
right.
That's field implies almost like, it's outdoors and it's got lots of grass, lots of open space, but only 9 players on the field at a time on a large field is.
Yeah, it's very sparse.
It does feel very sparse, and I think that's why a lot of times when you are watching this either in person or at home, the most of the field you never see. Like, you are focused solely on this one tiny part of the field at a time. This whole large field idea is only useful part of the time. When needed, the field is large enough.
Yeah.
All right, 4 bases. They mark the course a runner must take to score. They form a diamond. I think there's probably parts about the bases themselves that has history that I'm not super aware of. So I'm looking forward to learning more a little bit about, like, the length between the bases. And
a thing that just occurred to me that we might have to look into is that you have first base, second base, third base, and then you have home plate, which is also called home base, but I feel like is more commonly called home plate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that it has slightly different terminology.
And a different shape. If you've ever seen it kind of from the top, the shape is different.
Which is interesting because I don't think that the baseball players use the shape for any kind of determination. I'm not sure that they orient themselves by the shape of the base, but I could be wrong.
The shapes of the bases, yeah, we'll get into it, but there are things about home plate that play into the rules quite a bit. There's also things about the shape of the bases, the other bases, that are kind of the way they are for a reason, and so the players will leverage them in specific ways. Things like where you touch on the bag, or how you lead off. Things like that.
Right. I guess what I'm thinking, though, is because the bases are flat on the ground, that when you're like running the bases, it's difficult to tell the actual shape of the base and be like, oh, that's home plate. You would just know if you're paying attention.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You'd have to. Hopefully you are paying attention. The way that you think about going home versus going to the other bases also is kind of there is a lot of strategy involved. And there was an article that I had included as a part of this sort of setting the baseline again of this episode that equated baseball to chess, and that I don't think that's the tact I want to take when trying to get a casual fan involved in enjoying a sport.
It's exactly like another very complicated and difficult to understand game.
And that's the thing with baseball. Like I do want to put the caveat out there. Like I say I know nothing about baseball because in the grand scheme of things, I'm not a radio personality screaming at you about, what they should have done last week, what
sports radio
team A should have done last week in order to win the big game.
Right, railing against coaches or players or what.
We're going to be talking strictly about how to enjoy a sport that you may not be that into, because it's real popular just to say sports ball. It's the thing that the water cooler people talk about, and I'll never get into it. But I do want to learn from you, why are you wanting to go on this journey?
So I guess some background is in order, which is that I'm not really a person who's into sports. I've never been good at any sports because I'm not good at the physical coordination required for a lot of sports. But I know a little bit about a bunch of the different sports that we play here in the USA. And the one that I understand the best is baseball. And that's also the one that I find the least objectionable, I guess, or, the most engaging. I just don't find football or basketball very interesting to watch.
Long term, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. And especially being given the name of America's pastime, it has this allure in the US, I think that makes it if you're gonna know a sport, the obvious choice to start with is baseball.
Right.
And it's not even just a US based thing. I recently went to a baseball game in Japan, and that experience is completely different. You could know baseball for 50 years and go to Japan, and there would be obviously common rules for the game, but the culture and the way that you experience
they have the
there,
same number of bases?
Same bases. Yep, exactly the same bases.
They actually added a fifth base.
You know what? I would love an XFL take on baseball that
we've got a pentagon instead of a diamond.
Spike TV the baseball game, please, would you?
There's two pitchers and two batters at the same time.
Games have timers. I mean, just the addition of that would probably change it enough and make it so extreme that it'd be stressful enough.
But this is a good thing too. Is the other thing is that baseball is it's not a super fast-paced sport most of the time. Some of the action gets fast-paced, but I often feel kind of lost watching football because the action takes place so quickly that I don't know where am I supposed to be watching to see what's actually going on.
Sure.
Whereas with baseball, pretty much you're looking at the batter, maybe the pitcher, and then if they hit the ball, then you're watching them run.
So it's kind of advantageous that the way that the games are televised kind of forces you to focus only on one part of the game and
Right.
learn the intricacies of one minute aspect of the game, and then sort of everything kind of happens serendipitously, and you can maybe learn small bits along the way.
Well, and there's only ever like a couple of people doing anything at any one time: the pitcher, the catcher, the batter, or like the fielders or the baseman. Versus like an offensive and defensive line in football, where they're all moving around, and if you aren't paying attention where the ball's going, you kind of get lost. Or if they fake out in the play and then you get faked out, and you're like, man.
Potentially, that may be a misrepresentation of the way that it's shown on TV, because when in fact a ball is moving, let's say a player hits a ball to the outfield, there is a lot going on the field at that time. Folks are moving around.
There's people running to the ball and then fielding it, trying to get to the bases.
The person who did hit the ball needs to make the decision based on where that's going, whether they're going for 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever.
Right.
It is very much there are distinct decisions to be made at those moments, but I think that's probably what separates it from other sports, where the decisions that are being made are of the moment and they're very individualized. Baseball is kind of an individual sport masking as a team sport. And I don't know who has said that before in the past. I know it can be quoted to someone, but I don't know off the top of my head right now.
Right.
But it definitely does have that vibe. And that's why statistics are what they are in baseball. That's why they're so impactful to determining the overall successful player. So,
yeah, and it's also why one person's presence on a team can like make or break that team's fortunes.
And the position that they're in, whether they're going to go first, second, third, or ninth, it is very deterministic of what is expected of that person throughout the game. So, okay. This is all very, very good information. I should say, as a preface to this conversation, we have avoided actually talking about baseball to, like, if you would, quote unquote, save it for the show. And this is the first time that we're actually getting into it. So this is
we're going in blind,
very, very much so. It's a knuckleballer, if you want to. I'll do my best to like come up with as many sports related analogies as possible here, or baseball related analogies. But let's move on to the Wikipedia.org article about baseball. I'll start from the top. Maybe we can skip over some really kind of obvious things here
all the way through.
Yeah, I promise not to read this verbatim, but I will hit maybe a couple of big things. Let's actually scroll down to the contents here and maybe pick and choose a couple of maybe some things that spark your attention, things that you might be interested in kind of prefacing this whole conversation with.
Yeah. So I guess starting at the rules, I have a pretty good understanding, I would say, of the basic rules of baseball, how a game is played. I would say that I don't know, some of the more complex rules or arcane rules. Like I don't know the infield fly rule. That's the one I guess that people tend to quote or whatever. But, I get the whole 3 strikes thing and, innings and outs and balls. So that's, I guess I'm up to speed on that part of it. I know how a game is played. I've been to enough baseball games to have picked that up.
Okay. What about, let's see, personnel on the team? I know we talked briefly about players and sort of who is on the field. You did name a couple.
Yeah.
Do you have what do you know about the structure, let's say, of the managerial staff and or the way that the dugout is structured?
Not a whole lot. I would say I know mostly like the on-field positions. So the catcher and the pitcher and the baseman, shortstop, sort of things like that. Like, I don't know, designated hitters or pitch hitters or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or how, like the managerial system, that's not really ever something I've
had any interest in learning. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Okay. It does tend to you can get lost very, very quickly in like, let's name the like backup catcher, who's warming up the folks in the bullpen, like
right. And that's that's sort of one of the things that I've always found somewhat unappetizing about sports fandom is like knowing all of the people on the team and their positions like just never seemed super useful to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally get that. I am not a names person. I do want to recognize a name here and there, but it's really difficult to try and keep track of every single player on every single team and where they're going and sound knowledgeable about that. Like I can throw Derek Jeter, like you can throw a name out there,
right?
And make it sound like you know who you're talking about. But when it comes down to it, it really, I don't think it matters as much as trying to get just an appreciation of the sport itself and trying to understand that the game itself can be enjoyable no matter who is playing. It doesn't matter who's playing each position. It doesn't matter who's pitching today. You can start to learn how that particular player plays their position over time. Right. But it's so much easier to do that if you just choose one team and focus on that for, honestly, your whole life. Like it becomes a lifelong fandom thing that unless you're going to be in sports radio, you don't usually go beyond that.
Right. And I'm not looking to do like the sort of fantasy sports thing of like looking at a bunch of tables of statistics and going, this player has slightly higher whatever than this other guy.
Right. All right, I'm going to move on to 3, the strategy and tactics. This is probably this is the chess part of the article contents. There's probably a lot to unpack with things like pitching, fielding, and batting and base running. Let's separate those into like offense and defense, if you would, where offense is going to be the folks coming up to bat. Defense is going to be the folks on the field fielding during that time. Anything about this strategy that intrigues you, I guess, to learn more about baseball, or is there something where you've like learned about it and then just really, really bounced off?
I guess, I know of the different kinds of pitches, but I don't really have an idea of why you might use one at a particular time.
Mm-hmm.
Or, that, that players might intentionally try to, hit balls short or whatever to like advance people around the bases without trying to hit a home run or something like that.
Got it. Okay.
But yeah, I guess I've always been sort of an observer of baseball without really thinking about the tactics behind it. Why they, whether someone would go to steal a base or not.
Okay. One of the things I will say as a casual baseball fan that still I feel like I'm still trying to get a grip of, if you would, is determining what a pitch was after it was thrown. I
have no idea.
I relish the fact that baseball commentators, radio folks are able to describe a pitch to me by saying, it was
especially from up in their high perch.
Yes. Being able to tell the difference between a slider and a curve from 120 feet away up, 80 feet. Mm-hmm. And it just drives me wild sometimes that, maybe they're just saying words.
Right.
That's sometimes I just chalk it up to like, well, it was between 79 and 84. And so they said it was a splitter.
And if you're listening on the radio, it's not like you can argue with them.
True. Yes, that is very, very true. Sometimes I would also say their stance can give things away, like the way that they throw it. Zito on the I told you I wouldn't bring up names, but Zito on the San Francisco Giants and on the Oakland A's had a very distinctive delivery for his curve, And so when you did see it come out of his hand, it was very noticeable that it was going to be a curveball. But like that's the kind of thing that after watching for years and years and years, you start to learn a little bit more about these particular players. And maybe it's just like not being around baseball as much that makes me feel like it's going to take me forever to realize when someone is throwing this way, what pitch it was that they just threw. But that for me, that's been one of the things that like I still struggle with every single time I watch a game. Let's move on then to batting and base running tactics. I know you talked about infield fly rule, things like, hitting over the infield just to kind of get a runner to advance and stuff like that. The term sac fly?
No.
A sacrifice fly. Basically, you'd hit a ball into the outfield as far as you can. It doesn't go out of the park, but you occupy the outfielder long enough for the person who is on one of the bases to advance at least one base. Mm-hmm. The rule being that the runner can't advance until the ball is caught.
Right.
So, okay. All right. So this is good. This is sacrifice bunt. There's a lot of sacrifice in baseball.
Right. And I'm also reading, signaling a batter who's ahead in the count to not swing at the next pitch and basically be struck out, which is interesting as well.
Yes.
There's
very
more,
dependent.
Right. There's strategy in it rather than just like tactics,
Yes, I would definitely say so. Tactics is probably not tactics being the things you can do, strategy being how you utilize those tactics to your advantage to win.
And sort of looking at the whole game versus just the the next pitch that's ahead of you.
Right. Okay. All right. This is all, that's about as much as I want to get into Wikipedia. There's a whole bunch
history section.
There's a lot of history, obviously, and statistics, RBI, sabermetrics.
Well, it is interesting to note some of the things that make baseball different from other, popular American sports. I think the biggest one is that there isn't a clock of any kind. There's not a timer ticking down that everyone is sort of playing to.
Well, and I think this is a good way to get into what made you feel like you needed someone to guide you on this baseball journey, somebody who knew maybe it's a little bit more about baseball than you. But is it sort of the social stigma of man, this game is super boring? What's the deal? Why do people think this is so boring? Or am I missing a key nugget of what makes this interesting?
I think it was maybe, am I missing a key nugget? But I think it's also just that it's hard to, I guess, the reason that I felt I needed someone to sort of guide me is that if you go and onto a sports website about baseball, you aren't getting stuff that's geared to someone who's new to the sport. It's all very, complicated stuff. It requires you to already have a pretty in-depth knowledge of the sport because it's news about recruiting and training and all this stuff. And it's there's nothing geared towards someone who's okay, I know a little bit about baseball. How do I enjoy baseball more? Right.
Okay.
It's all, statistics and all sort of highly in-depth stuff. That's how sports media feels these days. It's just
you have to make it your full-time job to enjoy it. Otherwise,
right, you're either a super big fan or not a fan at all. And I just want to be in the middle there.
Honestly, that's where most of us are, and
right.
It's unfortunate that media makes. The folks at ESPN, they even have an article over here, how to enjoy baseball. It's not what are the rules of baseball, what are what are the four positions, or what are the four bases and what are the 9 positions. It is how do you enjoy baseball? How do I get an emotional reaction to a sport that maybe you know a ton about it, but that's not the way to enjoy it. You can be a complete stats-driven person, or, you use that for betting or who knows what. But, the fact is that enjoying baseball, I think, is that's kind of what you want to get out of sports. It's entertainment, right? It's not meant to be this thing that is over something that weighs on you, or you feel some sort of like I don't know, personal loss when your team loses, or like it's entertainment, right?
Right.
Just take from it what you get. Put into it what you get out of it. Take from it what you get into it. Whatever. You know what I'm trying to say. You should just enjoy it as the sport that it is. And
right. Well, and I think sort of going along with this, that like for baseball, each team plays a ton of games every year, and it's really just not feasible for a person to keep up with each and every game.
Pop fly quiz. How many games per year?
Oh, I think it's over 100 at least.
Okay. All right. Yes. Warmer.
Oh, 120?
162 games a year. So close.
That's a oddly specific number.
It is very, very specific. That does not include things like the playoffs or anything like that. But
right. So possibly even more than that if your team is good.
Yep. Absolutely. It is an almost year-round thing.
But like, how could you possibly live a life and also like, you couldn't watch every one of those games. It's just not possible. So, versus like a football season,
Right. Yes. Well, and to say like, only true fans watch all 162, like that's not possible. Right.
Right.
We're trying to cultivate a casual, sometimes fan here, and going neck deep and like jumping in the deep end, I don't think is the way to do this. I think
right.
If we're talking actual strategy here, I think I just want to like ease into it. There's a little bit more though that I want to learn about you specifically. You mentioned not being very coordinated as both probably an adult and a child. So I assume, did you try baseball? Were you on a team at all?
I know that I played t-ball as a kid, and I certainly have like played baseball in the context of like PE classes or whatever, but
okay.
Was never on like a little league team though.
Got it. Well, and it's probably not, you weren't employing tactics at that phase of baseball, of the sport.
Right. It was just like try to hit the ball with the bat was my biggest focus and greatest difficulty.
or trying to like just make sure that you showed up and that you were there to catch the ball or play your position or whatever.
Like,
it was more
I hit the ball. Now I have to remember to run and not just watch the ball.
Right. It's about cultivating probably a fan of the game, or of like, hey, this is the first step in a long line of eventually getting to, the big leagues. But
right.
Okay. All right. I personally played for a number of little league teams, but only up until I was like, I want to say 10 or so. I was doing the like whatever regular pitch stuff as a kid. I'm sure my parents have like videotapes of me somewhere pitching, which is thoroughly embarrassing. But one story I think that I need to tell with when it comes to baseball and how important it is in my family, and sort of how important fandom and like playing sports was in my family. My dad loves baseball, loves watching baseball. And when I was a kid, anytime I would get a ball, he would always put it in my left hand every single time. I had a ball, put it in my left hand. So I would started to learn to throw with my left hand. And so came to Little League, right? I'm probably one of like 3 in the entire league that is a left-handed person, right? And folks who write left-handed probably feel this too. There's not very many of you. Throwing a baseball became the only thing I did left-handed because my dad would always put the ball in my left hand. Now, the reason he did this was because historically, left-handed pitchers make more than right-handed pitchers. And when I made it to the big leagues, I'd be making more money. That was the reason.
That is some very that's a very long game to play.
It's an incredibly long game, but now I'm stuck basically doing literally everything else with my right hand. Writing, I am goofy foot, so which I like snowboard, whatever, the sitting in the batter's box as a left-handed hitter. But I throw with my left. I kick with my right. It's such a weird situation that, I had no control over how my body reacted to that, but it ended up being that way. And again, like that can be sort of that can be how important baseball is culturally to us here in America, where, you're forcing your kid to throw one way over another.
Right.
Let's talk then about maybe something that you don't need hand-eye coordination as much, video games. Do you play any baseball-based video games?
I think that I can remember playing some baseball video games. What was it, like the Backyard Baseball?
Yep,
series?
That series, yep.
When I was a little kid. But I haven't played baseball video games in a very long time.
Okay, so none of the latest The Show or whatever.
No, I've not played those. Yeah, I worry because my stepbrother has played a lot of the Madden games, and they, all these sports games have also become sort of hyper focused on, you have to be very knowledgeable about the game because they become so complex that they include all the stats and all that.
It's not a guided experience. It's not like you're playing a football RPG where
and it's not like a simplified experience either.
Right. I think there are parts of baseball video games in particular that have definitely improved over time. There are like campaigns that you can play, right, where you don't really need to know that much about the game itself, and you're like making kind of like RPG type decisions. You're going to get called up to the big leagues. What do you want to do? What do you say to the coach? And you
it's like a pretend career
choices.
Kind of thing. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. I think that may be sometimes a good gateway for some folks to getting into baseball, but understanding the strategy, I think, at a level where you are the player playing those games rather than watching professional players do it is a tough sell for me in understanding the game more quickly. Because what you find works in a video game is not potentially what works in real life. And it's not a one-to-one match of like, okay, the physics of the game versus, what I'm going to see in real life. It doesn't necessarily work that way. You can't just grab the strike zone and move it to the player's head every time and throw the fastball at their head to get them to first base
right.
It just doesn't work that way.
I think I can remember playing, years and years ago when I was in like middle school, some of the MLB games and just, being goofy with it and like hitting the batter with a pitch or whatever.
Right.
Just to see the like animation that they had of the batter getting hit by a ball or something.
Well, I think that like sort of trying to break the boundary of the game and make it your own is fun. It's in its own right. Because you kind of have to treat baseball entertainment that way, no matter what, whether it's a game or you're going in person or you're watching on TV or you're listening in the car. It is definitely not about intently focusing on the rules and thinking about them 24/7. It's about sort of like absorbing the experience as it is and thinking of it more like a movie and less of like a thing you're analyzing every decision at every moment and thinking, could they have done this? Could they have done that? It's more like being in the moment and thinking about it as, I don't know, like, I don't want to get too like heady about this stuff, but it is kind of like you're trying to view it as a movie. So I'll use that as a segue. Have you seen any baseball movies? Have you gone the distance? If you build it, they will come. Nothing?
I know that I've watched Angels in the Outfield.
Okay. Okay.
If you call that a baseball movie.
I would say so. I mean, that was the ye old Disney days of when they owned that team. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But I can't think of any other baseball movies that I've seen.
Okay, so maybe see that's a good thing to do. I know I was looking at a Reddit thread and folks were like, "Well, to get started, you should watch this 80-hour series of baseball, the Ken Burns documentary." Like, no,
it's a little much,
folks. It is a lot.
I might as well just watch a bunch of baseball games that are equally as long.
You'll probably it's probably great for the history, maybe the background, some of the rules and things like that. But when it comes to understanding the current culture of baseball, I agree. You're better off watching a couple games here and there. Baseball movies, though, we'll probably have to start. I'll start a letterboxed list for baseball movies specifically, and I'll put it in the show notes. And I guess I'll take some suggestions as well, because I've got some favorites.
Maybe we can do like a mini series within the series of like watching baseball movies.
Yes,
like
we're going to have
to or something,
because they are very much like they.
You have to think of a baseball related name for that.
Oh boy! Now you got the gears turning. Batter's box.
Yeah, the bullpen. I don't know.
Bullpen. Yeah, we'll find one. We'll workshop it. It'll be good. Speaking of watching things, what about TV? Watching baseball on TV. I also included radio, and I'm going to jump down to in person as well.
So this is interesting. So I've certainly watched bits and pieces of a baseball game on TV, but I don't think I've ever watched like a full baseball game.
Like start to finish?
Yeah, just because they tend to be quite long. But I've listened to baseball games on the radio, and that's what I can remember the most of as like a kid is that my dad would listen to, so I grew up in Cincinnati, so we would listen to 700 WLW, which was the local talk radio, but it was also the Reds radio station. So we would quite often hear the baseball games as well, which was, they were broadcast by Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxhall, those are like
ingrained in your memory. I can tell. Yeah.
Those are, when I think of baseball, I think of those two announcing baseball. And, they both have their, I guess all baseball announcers sort of have their thing that they're known for, their saying or whatever. And Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxhall both have theirs, which are actually, when they built the new Red Stadium, they put them up on the side of the stadium. Their different sayings, because Joe Nuxhall always said rounding third and heading for home. And Marty Brennaman at the end of a game that the Reds have won always says, and this one belongs to the Reds.
I love that. You have no idea. Like just a smile from ear to ear right now, because I very much the culture of baseball for me came through radio. I grew up in the Central Valley, and we just didn't have probably at that point any cable, any sort of like TV situation to watch baseball. So it was all KMBR 680. Back then it was actually KMBR 68, I think. And
for us it was 700 WLW. And then the Cincinnati Reds radio network. And they have the same jingle that they've had since as long as I can remember. Game would start.
I mean, there are jingles on the radio that were built specifically for when the game started that would get played, and it becomes this earworm and this thing that through repetition, both with like the sayings of the commentators and also just the music that gets played every single time, it becomes definitely a part of like the collective memory of an entire area. So yeah, for me it was KMBR. They have John Miller, for a long time I think was in another city. I feel like he was in Milwaukee for a bit, but for as long as I have been a baseball fan, at least as an adult, John Miller's been my guy. Before that, it was Hank Greenwald, I believe. And the wild part is that Hank Greenwald's son does the spring training games on sfgiants.com. And so like that sound comes back through in live modern games. And it is just this weird, like, transporting experience that, I feel like baseball can only provide that.
Right. It's interesting, too, because in Cincinnati, you had, for my whole childhood, it was Marty Brennaman and Joe Nuxhall, and then Joe Nuxhall retired and then was eventually replaced by Tom Brennaman, which is Marty Brennaman's son. So it was Marty and Tom Brennaman for a while. And I know the names and like all of the sponsors. Those are all names that I've heard before. Like UDF, United Dairy Farmers, like they're huge in Cincinnati.
Right. Yeah. The I definitely as a kid had this idea that one day I would want to be on the radio and doing sports. It's still a far-flung dream for me. Right. I would absolutely love to do that someday, but
I kind of think the same way. I'd love to be on the radio, like calling sports, but I just don't. I could not keep up with a baseball game enough to properly call it. Again, I would like see a pitch and be like, he threw the ball, and he didn't hit the ball.
Right. Yeah. No, I get that. I get that because learning the language of baseball, I think, is always the first step in feeling like you can riff on it and talk about it. But so much about baseball radio calls is not about the game either. It's like it's how they say something and what they say in between pitches. It has almost nothing to do with the game itself. It's such a weird, intangible, and again, like overly heady thing for me that I think about way too much. So
yeah. So this is another thing that I think interests me in baseball is that there's a lot of history and sort of character behind it. You have these jingles that are clearly descended from, like early, 20th century kind of tunes at the time. And, baseball's been around for over 100 years now. Well, more than that. And the, a lot of the baseball stadiums that have been legendary, some of which are still around even and so beloved. And you just don't find that kind of history and character in other sports. That there's just they just don't go back that far. Or
I feel like if I can say, like, to its detriment sometimes. I feel like baseball almost is too much up its own business.
It's It's been America's pastime for a long time. Everything's very traditional.
Absolutely. Well, and also, folks have just like it is this way and it is that way because it is this way. It's a very circular way to think about the decisions that were made about a particular sport. And that's not to say, or to discredit the fact that, folks are coming from all over the world to play here because it is the, top tier level of professional sport being played for baseball. Mm-hmm. But also, like, that history can be completely lost on the hottest phenom from, wherever, from some South American country, right, who doesn't know anything about American sports or understands the history of baseball and what it means here, but can be so good at it that it becomes a part of the culture. And I think I find an appreciation for that, I think, where, it doesn't have to be about this crunchy white history of baseball that you elevate on this pedestal to be, better than everything else that we're doing currently. Like, the golden days of baseball, they're gone, but, we'll never get them back. And I don't think that's the case. And you don't have to feel that way to enjoy the sport itself. So just in a way to kind of wrap this up and put a bow on it for next episode maybe, and like give us kind of a starting point, I've started to put together a list of topics for this show. I think we should also maybe source some topics. So if there are folks listening right now who have ideas or questions for certain things that they want to know about baseball, I mean, it can be as small as some of the ones we have on here, grass, pine tar, or it could be as big as I don't know what do I have to run after a home run? Some of the questions actually that we had as a part of our trailer, which are
somewhat interesting to actually talk about.
Yes, they could potentially be very, very interesting topics.
Ballpark food, that's going to be a good one.
Yes, we will for sure bring back a classic morning show segment for that one. Absolutely. Any particular topics you're thinking about maybe leading off? leading off for your actually one let me roll the table. Yeah, let me roll this back a little bit. What do you want to get out of this? What's the final goal? Do you want to choose a team? Do you want to like learn the tactics? Do you want to find enjoyment? Do you want to just finish a game? Is that maybe the final goal for this? What do you want? What do you want to get out of this?
No spoilers, but I think I already have a team in mind. We can get into that in maybe the next episode. So I think I just want to. I guess I want to feel as though I've followed a season of baseball, and that I sort of know. Because, if you ask me now how any team finished in the previous season, I would really have no idea. So I would just like to, at least have some idea of how my team finished and, then maybe how the teams that ultimately played in the World Series or whatever, know who those teams were.
Got it.
Kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, coming up here, we're looking at the end of this month, pretty much. Mm-hmm. The first spring training game to be played. Which is spring training. I feel like I have to kind of explain everything. Spring training.
Yeah.
Okay. It is in the spring season. The baseball players they do the training. They are usually split by the Florida League and the Arizona League. So they're in two different spots. This is also a very historical thing that has happened where the place where a lot of these folks are playing has been the place they've been playing since the 1960s, 1950s. But they go down to the warmest part of the country that they can find for training. They play each other sometimes once or twice a day. They'll do something called split squad, where they'll take the teams and take different players to different places to play. They are going to start here on the 21st of what looks to be February. So that's coming up very soon. We'll have about a month of spring training, which I really, really do hope to get down to. And then we'll kick it off for the actual season, which should be a good one. My team, I've got one. I'm sure if you followed me on any sort of social media, I'm sure you've seen me post about it, but I guess I'll save it for the show.
Yeah, we'll reveal our teams in the next episode.
It's going to be a 10-second episode where we just say what the team is, and then you'll just have to wait for next week. Sorry about that.
Yep.
But I'm really, really looking forward to some of these topics.
Mm-hmm.
Grounds crew.
I've added some of my own. It's not. So we're not just going to talk about like games and scores and players. We're going to talk about things around the game, the culture of baseball, things you experience when you go to a game and stuff like that.
There's a lot that I take for granted when it comes to this kind of stuff too, where as you start saying words, my mind starts racing on like, well, yeah, no, you're right. Like I do I hadn't thought about that before, but that is absolutely something that I do know that I don't know how to externalize. So for me, it's going to be kind of a good exercise in maybe working on my education, my sports outreach, my baseball outreach a bit, and getting other folks involved in it. I do have, some of my best friends in life are absolutely not into baseball. And this is not to say that my ultimate goal is to get them into it, but I do want to get a little better versed at being able to speak to it, and
at least give them an idea of why they might be interested, or what makes it exciting.
Explain it in terms that could be appealing to the person I'm talking to, I think is maybe the best way to describe that for me.
And I guess what I'm looking to get out of this is that when someone at work says, "Oh, did you see the, XYZ baseball game?" That instead of just saying what I always say, which is no, that I would be able to, at least carry on some kind of basic conversation about that.
Just say, was Kershaw pitching last night? Is that? Yeah. No. Okay. All right. Andrew, where can people reach us?
You can reach us at topics@baseline.show. We'd love to hear your topic suggestions and any other feedback you have about the show.
And you can also head over to Goodstuff.fm, our network, and check out some of the other great shows less about baseball.
This has been Baseline, and that's the ball game.